we're back with Chapter 17 of The Sword and the Stone by T.H. White. "I think it is time," said Merlin, looking at him over the top of his spectacles one afternoon, "that you had another dose of education. That is, as time goes." It was an afternoon in early spring, and everything outside the window looked most beautiful. The winter mantle had gone, taking with it Sir Grummore, Master Twitty, King Pellinore, and the questing beast. The later, having revived under the influence of kindliness and bread and milk, it had bounded off into the snow with every sign of gratitude, to be followed 2 hours later by the excited king. And the watchers from the battlements had observed it confusing its snowy footprints most ingeniously as it reached the edge of the chase. It was running backwards, bounding 20 foot sideways, rubbing out its marks with its tail, climbing along horizontal branches, and performing many other tricks with evident enjoyment. They had also seen King Pellinore, who had dutifully kept his eyes shut and counted 10,000 while this was going on, becoming quite confused when he arrived at the difficult spot, and finally galloping off in the wrong direction, with his brachet trailing behind him. It was a lovely afternoon. Outside the schoolroom window, the larches in the distant forest had already assumed the fullness of their dazzling green. The earth twinkled and swelled with 1,000,000 drops, and every bird in the world had come home to court and sing. The village folk were forth in their gardens every spring, planting garden beans, and it seemed that with these emergencies, and those of the slugs, coincidentally with the beans, the buds, the lambs, and the birds, every living thing had conspired to come out. "What would you like to be?" asked Merlin. Wart looked out the window, listening to the thrush's twice-done song of dew. He said, "I have been a bird once, but it was only in the mews at night, and I never got a chance to fly, even if one ought not to do one's education twice. Don't you think I could be a bird, so as to learn more about that?" He had been bitten with the craze for birds, which bites all sensible people in spring, and which, sometimes, even leads to such excesses as birds' nesting, etc. "I can see no reason why you shouldn't," said the magician. "Why not try it at night?" "But they will all be asleep at night." "All the better the chance of inspecting them without their flying away. You could go with Archimedes this evening, and he would tell you about them." "Would you do that, Archimedes?" "I would love to," said the owl. "I was feeling like a little saunter myself." "Do you know," asked the wart, thinking of the thrush, "why birds sing, or how? Is it a language?" Of course it's a language. It isn't a big language like human speech, but it's large." "Gilbert White," said Merlin, "remarks, or will remark, however you like to put it, that the language of birds is very ancient, and, like other ancient modes of speech, little is said, but much is intended. He also says somewhere that the rooks in the breeding season attempt sometimes in the gaiety of their hearts to sing, but with no great success." "I love rooks," said the wart. "It's funny, but I think they are my favorite bird." "Why?" asked Archimedes. "Well, I like them. I like their sauce." "Neglectful parents," quoted Merlin, who was in a scholarly mood, "and saucy, perverse children." "It is true," said Archimedes reflectively, "that is all the convidae possess, a distorted sense of humor." "It is true," said Archimedes reflectively, "that all the corvidae possess a distorted sense of humor," Wart explained. "I love the way they enjoy flying. They don't just fly like other birds, but fly for fun. It is lovely when they hoist home to bed in a flock at night, all cheering and making rude remarks and pouncing on each other in a vulgar way. They turn over on their backs sometimes and tumble out of the air. It's just ridiculous, or else, because they have forgotten they are flying, they have coarsely begun to scratch themselves with fleas without thinking about it." "They are intelligent birds," said Archimedes. "In spite of their low humor, they are one of the birds that have the parliaments, you know, and a social system." "Do you mean they have laws?" "Certainly they have laws. They meet in the autumn in a field to talk them over." "What sort of laws?" "Oh, well, about the defense of the rookery and marriage and so forth. You are not allowed to marry outside the rookery, and if you do become become quite lost in all sense of decency and bring back a sable virgin from a neighboring settlement, then everyone pulls your nest to pieces as fast as you can build it up. They make you go into the suburbs, you know, and that is why every rookery has a lying-out nest all round it, several trees away. Another thing I like about them, said the wart, is their go. They may be thieves and practical jokers, and they do quarrel and bully each other in a squawky way, but they have got the courage to mob their enemies. I should think it takes some courage to mob a hawk, even if there is a pack of you, and even while they are doing it, if they clown. They are mobs, said Archimedes loftily. You have said the word. Well, they are larky mobs anyway, said the wart, and I like them. What is your favorite bird? Asked Merlin politely to keep the peace. Archimedes thought this over for a time and then said, Well, it's a large question, you know. It's rather like asking what is your favorite book. On the whole, however, I think I must prefer the pigeon. To eat? I was leaving that side of it out, said the owl in civilized tones. Actually, the pigeon is the favorite dish of all raptors, if they are big enough to take her, but I was thinking of nothing but domestic habits. Describe them. The pigeon, said Archimedes, is a kind of Quaker. She dresses in grey, a dutiful child, a constant lover, and a wise parent. She knows all philosophies, that the hand of every man is against her. She has learned throughout the centuries to specialize in escape. No pigeon has ever committed an act of aggression, nor turned upon her precursors. But no bird likewise is so skillful in eluding them. She has learned to drop out of a tree on the opposite side to man, and to fly low so there is a hedge between them. No other bird can estimate a range so well. Vigilant, powdery, odorous, and loose-feathered, so that dogs object to take them in their mouths. Armored against pellets by the padding of those feathers, the pigeons coo to one another with true love, nourish their cunningly hidden children with true solicitude, and fly from the aggressor with true philosophy, a race of peace-lovers continually canvassing away from the destructive Indian in covered wagons. They are lovingly individualists, surviving against the forces of massacre only by wisdom in escape. Did you know, added Archimedes, that a pair of pigeons always roosts head to tail, so they can keep a lookout in both directions? I know our tame pigeons do, said the wart. What I like about wood pigeons is the clap of their wings, and how they soar up and close their wings and sink during their courting flights, so that they fly rather like woodpeckers. It isn't very like woodpeckers, said Merlin. No, it isn't, admitted the wart. And what is your favorite bird? Asked Archimedes, feeling that his master ought to be allowed to say. Merlin put his fingers together like Sherlock Holmes and replied immediately, I prefer the chaffinch. My friend Linnaeus calls them coleobs, or bachelor bird. The flocks have the sense to separate during the winter, so that all the males are in one flock and all the females in the other. For the winter months, at any rate, they are in perfect peace. The conversation, observed Archimedes, arose out of whether birds could talk. Another friend of mine, said Merlin immediately, in his most learned way, maintains, or will maintain, that the question of the language of birds arises out of imitation. Aristotle, you know, also attributes tragedy to imitation. Archimedes sighed heavily and remarked in prophetic tones, You had better get it off your chest. It's like this, said Merlin. The kestrel drops upon a mouse, and the poor mouse, transfixed with those needle talons, cries out in agony. His one squeal, kee! Next time the kestrel sees a mouse, his own soul cries out, in key and imitation. Another kestrel, perhaps his mate, comes to that cry, and after a few million years all kestrels are calling to each other with the individual note of kee, kee, kee. You can make a whole story out of one bird, said the wart. I don't want to. The hawks scream like their prey, the mallards croak like the frogs they eat, the shrikes also, like these creatures in distress. The blackbirds and thrushes click like the snail shells they hammer to pieces. The various finches make the noise of cracking seeds, and the woodpecker imitates the tapping on wood which he makes to get the insects that he eats. But all birds do not give a single note. No, of course not. The call note arises out of imitation, and then the various bird songs are developed by repeating the single note call and decanting upon it. I see, said Archimedes coldly. And what about me? Well, you know quite well, said Merlin, that the shrew mouse you pounce upon squeals out, Queek! That is why the young of your species call Kiwik. And the old? Inquired Archimedes sarcastically. Hoo-hoo! Cried Merlin, refusing to be dampened. It's obvious, my dear fellow, after their first winter, that's the wind in the hollow trees where they prefer to sleep. I see, said Archimedes, more coolly than ever. This time, we note, it is not a question of prey at all. Oh, come along, replied Merlin. There are other things besides the things you eat. Even a bird drinks sometimes, for instance, or bathes itself in water. It is the liquid notes of a river that we hear in Robin's song. It seems now, said Archimedes, that it is no longer a question of what we eat, but also what we drink or hear. And why not? The owl said resignedly. Oh, well. I think it is an interesting idea, said the wart to encourage his tutor. But how does language come out of those imitations? They repeat them at first, said Merlin, and then they vary them. You don't seem to realize what a lot of meaning there resides between the tone and speed of voice. Suppose I were to say, what a nice day, just like that. You would answer, yes, so it is. But if I were to say, what a nice day, in caressing tones, you might think I was a nice person. But then again, if I were to say, what a nice day, quite breathless, you might look about you and see what had put me in a fright. It is like this that the birds have developed their language. Would you mind telling us, said Archimedes, since you know so much about it, how many various things we birds are able to express by altering the tempo and emphasis of the elaborations of our call notes? But a large number of things. You can cry Kiwik in tender accents if you are in love, Kiwik angrily in challenge or in hate. You can cry it on a rising scale as a call note if you don't know where your partner is, or attract their attention away if strangers are straying near your nest. If you go near the old nest in winter time, you may cry Kiwik lovingly, a conditioned reflex from the pleasures which you once enjoyed within it. And if I come near you in a startling way, you may cry out Kiwik, Kiwik, Kiwik in loud alarm. When we come to conditioned reflexes, remarked Archimedes sourly, I prefer to look for a mouse. So you may. When you find it, I dare say you will make another sound characteristic of owls, though not often mentioned in books on ornithology. I refer to the sound of tok or tuk, which human beings call a smacking of the lips. And what sound is that supposed to imitate? Obviously, the breaking of mousy bones. You are a cunning master, said Archimedes admiringly. And as far as a poor owl is concerned, you will just have to get away with it. All I can tell you from my own personal experience is that it is not like that at all. A tit can tell you only that it is in danger. But what kind of danger it is in, it can say, look out for the cat, or look out for the hawk, or look out for the tawny owl, as plainly as A, B, C. I don't deny it, said Merlin. I am only telling you the beginnings of language. Suppose you try to tell me the song of a single bird, which I can't attribute originally to imitation. And we will stop there.